I couldn't take it anymore. 6 months of this entitled behavior. 6 months of her trespassing on my property whenever she felt like it. 6 months of racial slurs whispered just loud enough for me to hear over the fence. But tonight was the final straw. Finding her drunk, once again, in my jacuzzi that I worked 20 years on the force to afford. Well, Karen, you're about to learn a lesson about respect that will stick with you for a very, very long time. And trust me when I say this, you're going to regret every single time you stepped foot on my property uninvited. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about entitled people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Moving into Oak Ridge Estates was supposed to be my reward. After 20 years serving as a police officer in one of the most dangerous precincts in Chicago, I'd saved enough to retire early and buy my dream home in this upscale neighborhood. The house wasn't extravagant by Oak Ridge standards. A modest 3-bedroom with a beautiful backyard featuring a custom-built jacuzzi that I splurged on. It was my sanctuary, my hard-earned slice of peace after 2 decades of seeing the worst humanity had to offer. My name is Marcus Johnson, and at 45, I was ready for the quiet life. The first week in my new home was everything I'd dreamed of during those long night shifts. Mornings drinking coffee on my back deck, afternoons tending to the garden I'd always wanted to grow, and evenings soaking in my jacuzzi under the stars. I'd earned this. I deserved this. The trouble started exactly 8 days after I moved in. I was grilling some steaks when I heard a splash coming from my backyard. At first, I thought maybe a neighborhood cat had fallen into the jacuzzi. I rushed around the corner of my house to find a middle-aged white woman lounging in my hot tub, a glass of wine in her hand. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice level despite my shock. "This is private property." The woman looked at me with narrowed eyes, taking a long sip of her wine before responding. "I'm just borrowing it for a bit," she said casually, as if this was a completely normal thing to do. The previous owners never minded. They were friends of mine. "Well, I'm not the previous owners," I replied firmly, "and I would appreciate it if you'd get out of my jacuzzi and leave my property." She scoffed, sloshing wine over the rim of her glass. "Do you know who I am? I'm Patricia Whitfield. My husband is on the Neighborhood Association board. I don't care if your husband is the President of the United States. Ma'am, this is my home, and you're trespassing." Her face contorted with indignation. As she climbed out, she muttered something under her breath. I couldn't catch all of it, but I distinctly heard a racial slur that I hadn't been called to my face since my rookie days on the force. I took a deep breath. I wasn't a cop anymore. I didn't have to maintain that professional demeanor that had been drilled into me for decades. But old habits die hard, and instead of responding the way part of me wanted to, I simply pointed toward the gate that led to the street. "Please leave, Mrs. Whitfield, and don't come back without an invitation." She gathered her things, a towel, her phone, and the half-empty wine bottle, and stormed off, but not before turning to hiss. "You people are all the same, so aggressive." I was just being neighborly. I reported the incident to neighborhood security, who apologized profusely and assured me it wouldn't happen again. I wanted to believe them, but something in Patricia Whitfield's entitled demeanor told me this wasn't over. I was right. 3 days later, I returned home from grocery shopping to find her in my jacuzzi again, this time with another woman around her age. They were laughing loudly, several empty bottles of wine scattered on my deck. "Mrs. Whitfield," I said, setting down my groceries, "we've been through this. You are trespassing on private property." "Fine. Don't be such a buzzkill," she slurred, clearly intoxicated. "I was just showing Susan your setup. It's much nicer than the community pool." "Because it's not a community pool," I said, my patience wearing thin. "It's my private jacuzzi on my private property, which you are currently trespassing on." Again. "We'll leave when we're good and ready," she shot back, taking another swig directly from a wine bottle. "What are you going to do, call the cops? I'm sure they'd love to hear about how you're harassing 2 respectable women just trying to enjoy their afternoon." The implied threat wasn't lost on me. As a former officer, I knew exactly how this could be twisted. A black man calling the police on two white women in an upscale neighborhood? It was a scenario that could go south quickly, regardless of who actually owned the property. "You have 5 minutes to gather your things and leave," I said, my voice deathly calm. "After that, I'm calling neighborhood security and filing a formal complaint with the homeowners association." The friend, Susan, seemed to sense the seriousness in my tone and quickly got out, grabbing her towel. "Come on, Pat, let's just go. This isn't worth it." Patricia shot me a venomous look but finally followed her friend's lead. As they left through my gate, I heard her distinctly say, "Can you believe they let one of them move in here? The property values are going to tank." That night, I installed security cameras covering my entire backyard. I wasn't taking any chances. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA, complete with the footage of Patricia's second trespassing incident. The association president, a retired judge named Richard Alvarez, was sympathetic. "I'm sorry you're experiencing this, Marcus," he said over the phone. "Patricia has been problematic with other neighbors as well. Her husband Greg is on the board, but even he has trouble reining her in. We'll issue a formal warning, and if there's another incident, we'll impose the maximum fine allowed under our bylaws." I appreciated his support but wondered if it would be enough to deter someone like Patricia. Something told me she wasn't the type to respond to warnings or fines. For the next 2 weeks, my property remained Karen-free. I started to relax, thinking perhaps the formal complaint had done the trick. Then came Friday night. I was working late in my home office when my phone buzzed with a security alert. The camera had detected movement in my backyard. I checked the live feed to see not just Patricia, but what appeared to be a small gathering of at least 6 people, all middle-aged, all white, all helping themselves to my jacuzzi. They'd brought coolers full of alcohol and were playing music from a portable speaker. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was a deliberate provocation. I threw on a jacket and stormed outside. "Everyone out. Now, this is private property, and you are all trespassing." Patricia, drunker than I'd seen her yet, raised her glass in a mock toast. "Everyone, this is our new neighbor I was telling you about. Isn't he just so angry all the time? So aggressive?" One of the men, who I assumed was her husband Greg, looked uncomfortable. "Pat, maybe we should just go. This isn't right." "No, Greg," she slurred, sloshing her drink. "He needs to learn how things work around here. The previous owners shared. They were part of the community. He needs to be more community-minded." "The previous owners may have invited you," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "I have not. This is my home, which I worked my entire career to afford. You are all trespassing, and I am calling security and the police. Anyone still on my property when they arrive will be formally charged." A couple of the guests quickly gathered their things, muttering apologies as they left. Greg tried to coax Patricia out of the jacuzzi, but she was belligerent. "You can't make me leave," she said, sinking deeper into the water. "This is harassment. I'm going to report you." I didn't bother responding. I simply took out my phone and dialed. First neighborhood security, then the local police. I made sure to emphasize that I was a retired police officer dealing with trespassers who refused to leave my property. I knew it would get a faster response. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, both security and a police cruiser arrived. The remaining guests scattered quickly, but Patricia remained defiantly in my jacuzzi, despite Greg's increasingly desperate pleas for her to leave. The responding officers were professional. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, recognized me from a training seminar I'd conducted years earlier. To smooth things over considerably, while the other officer took statements from the remaining guests, Rodriguez approached Patricia. "Ma'am, you need to exit the jacuzzi now. You're on private property without the owner's consent. That's trespassing, which is a criminal offense." "He's just being difficult," Patricia slurred, gesturing wildly toward me. "Everyone uses this jacuzzi. Ask anyone in the neighborhood." "That's not relevant, ma'am," Rodriguez replied calmly. "Mr. Johnson has not given you permission to be here. You need to leave now, or we'll have to remove you forcibly and place you under arrest." that finally got through to her. With as much dignity as a drunk woman in a swimsuit could muster, Patricia climbed out of the jacuzzi. Greg quickly wrapped a towel around her and led her away, apologizing profusely over his shoulder. "I'm sorry about this, Marcus," Officer Rodriguez said after they left. "Do you want to press charges?" Part of me did. But another part, the part that had seen how the system worked, knew it would only escalate things. Patricia would paint herself as the victim, and I'd be dragged into a legal battle that would sour my relationship with the entire neighborhood. "Not this time," I said. "But I want this incident on record, and I want a restraining order." The officers took my statement and advised me on how to file for the restraining order first thing Monday morning. After they left, I drained and cleaned my jacuzzi, unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Patricia Whitfield had been publicly humiliated. Someone with an ego like hers wouldn't let that go unanswered. I was Ray. The next few weeks brought a campaign of petty harassment. My mailbox was damaged. Anonymous complaints were filed with the HOA about the height of my grass, the color of my shutters, the placement of my trash cans. Someone let the air out of my tires, twice, and each time I saw Patricia in the neighborhood. She made a point of crossing the street, then loudly telling whoever she was with that she didn't feel safe. None of it was explicitly criminal. None of it could be directly tied to her. But I knew. And from the sympathetic looks I got from other neighbors, they knew too. The situation came to a head a month later. I was coming home late from a dinner with former colleagues when I saw lights on in my backyard. The security alert had come through, but I'd been driving and hadn't checked my phone. I quietly entered through the side gate, already knowing what I would find. Patricia was alone this time, floating in my jacuzzi, an empty bottle of vodka bobbing in the water beside her. She was singing to herself, so drunk she couldn't keep her head up straight. I was done. Done being the bigger person. Done turning the other cheek. Done letting this woman disrespect me, my property, and my right to peacefully enjoy the retirement I'd earned. But I was also smarter than to confront a drunk, belligerent woman alone, especially one who had already shown she wasn't above making false accusations. I called the police, then stood where the security camera could clearly record me, doing nothing but waiting calmly for them to arrive. When the cruiser pulled up, it was Officer Rodriguez again, along with his partner. "Again, Mr. Johnson?" Rodriguez sighed, looking past me to where Patricia was now struggling to sit upright in the jacuzzi. "She's been repeatedly warned, served with a restraining order, and still keeps trespassing," I said. "This time I want to press charges. This harassment has to stop." They approached the jacuzzi, and the scene played out much like before, except this time Patricia was too drunk to even form coherent sentences. They had to physically help her out of the water. "Patricia Whitfield, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, violation of a restraining order, and public intoxication," Officer Rodriguez recited, securing handcuffs around her wrists while his partner wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Even in her inebriated state, the reality of being arrested seemed to penetrate Patricia's consciousness. She began to wail, then to threaten, then to beg. But it was too late. The officers led her to the cruiser, reading her rights as they went. I followed up the next day, insisting on pressing charges to the fullest extent. Patricia spent the night in jail before being bailed out by a mortified Greg. She was charged with criminal trespassing, violation of a restraining order, and public intoxication. Given her lack of prior record, she was offered a plea deal, community service, a substantial fine, and mandatory alcohol counseling. But the public humiliation of being arrested seemed to finally break through her sense of entitlement. Greg came to see me the day after her court appearance, looking haggard and ashamed. "I want to apologize for my wife's behavior," he said, standing awkwardly on my front porch. "It's inexcusable. Where? She's getting help for her drinking, and we've decided to move. Our house goes on the market next week. I just wanted you to know that, and to say how sorry I am for everything you've had to endure." I appreciated his apology but remained cautious. "Thank you for that, Greg. I hope Patricia gets the help she needs." He nodded, turned to leave, then paused. "She's not a bad person, you know. just privileged in a way that's blinded her. Guess this has been a wake-up call. I simply nodded, not trusting myself to respond generously to that statement. 20 years as a cop had taught me that people rarely changed fundamentally. They just adapted their behavior to avoid consequences. The Whitfield's house sold quickly, and they moved out within a month. The neighborhood became peaceful again. Other neighbors who had kept their distance during the worst of the Patricia drama began to stop by, invite me to barbecues, welcome me properly to the community. It seemed her toxic presence had affected more people than just me. Life went back to normal, or what I hoped would be my new normal. Mornings with coffee on the deck, afternoons in the garden, evenings in my jacuzzi under the stars. Then, 6 months after the Whitfields had moved away, I received a curious letter. It was from a rehab facility in Arizona, with Patricia's name in the return address. I almost threw it away unopened. Almost. Inside was a handwritten letter, part of her 12-step program, making amends to those she'd harmed. It was surprisingly thoughtful and seemed genuine in its remorse. I will never be able to fully understand the harm my actions caused you, she wrote. My entitlement, my prejudice, and my alcoholism combined to make me behave in ways that were not just rude or thoughtless, but actively harmful and discriminatory. I am working every day to address not just my dependence on alcohol, but the underlying attitudes that I allowed to govern my behavior. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that the consequences of my actions led me to a better path. And for that, at least, I am grateful. I read the letter several times, conflicted about how to feel. On one hand, it seemed sincere. On the other, it was easy to write words on a page when you were hundreds of miles away and would never have to face the person you'd harmed. In the end, I decided not to respond. Some chapters are better left closed. But the letter did make me think about consequences and whether they truly had the power to change people. It made me consider how I wanted to use the rest of my retirement, the years I'd earned through service. 2 weeks later, I reached out to the local community center and offered to start a mentoring program for at-risk youth, drawing on my experience as an officer, but focusing on prevention rather than punishment, teaching kids about respect for themselves, for others, for property, for the law, showing them that actions have consequences, but that those consequences don't have to define your entire life. The program took off, and soon I was spending 3 days a week working with kids from the wider community, not just our affluent neighborhood. It gave me purpose, a way to continue serving even after hanging up my badge. And on the days when I wasn't mentoring, I still had my mornings with coffee, my afternoons in the garden, and my evenings in the jacuzzi under the stars. My reward, my sanctuary, my home. As for Patricia, I heard through neighborhood gossip that she and Greg had divorced, that she was still sober, still in Arizona, working at the same rehab facility that had treated her, trying to help others overcome the same demons she'd faced. I wish I could say I was completely past the anger, the indignation, the sense of violation her actions had caused. But I'm human. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. What I can say is that I'm at peace with how things unfolded. Justice was served, not through revenge, but through the proper channels. The system worked as it should. And sometimes that's the best we can hope for in this imperfect world. That when we're wronged, the mechanisms designed to protect us will actually do their job. That the boundaries we set will be respected. And when they're not, that there will be consequences proportionate to the violation. That night, soaking in my jacuzzi under a blanket of stars, I raised a glass of iced tea in a silent toast, to consequences, to justice, to peace hard-won and well-deserved, and to second chances for Patricia, for the kids I mentored, and for a society still learning how to truly see and respect all its citizens. Wait, I've been telling you about what happened with Patricia, but I haven't told you about what happened after the Whitfields moved away. There was a period of peace, true enough, but about 2 months after they left, something strange started happening. Items began disappearing from my backyard. Small things at first: gardening tools, decorative solar lights, outdoor cushions. I assumed it was neighborhood kids pulling pranks and didn't think much of it. Then one evening, I came home to find my jacuzzi running, the water churning at maximum power. I certainly hadn't left it that way. The security cameras showed nothing. They'd been carefully angled away from their usual positions. Someone who knew about my security system had deliberately avoided being recorded. This happened 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each time, the jacuzzi would be running, sometimes with empty wine bottles or glasses left behind, but no footage of whoever was responsible. It was as if Patricia's spirit had somehow stayed behind to haunt my backyard. I upgraded my security system, adding more cameras with wider angles and motion sensors that would send alerts to my phone. The next afternoon, I got an alert while at the community center. I checked the footage to see a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, slipping into my backyard and heading straight for the jacuzzi. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed they belonged there, who felt entitled to what wasn't theirs. It hit me then. She moved like Patricia. I left the community center immediately and drove home, calling Officer Rodriguez on the way. By the time I arrived, the young woman was lounging in my jacuzzi, a bottle of expensive champagne chilling beside her. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. Same blonde hair, same sharp features, same entitled expression. This had to be Patricia's daughter. Officer Rodriguez arrived minutes later. The young woman, unlike her mother, didn't resist or create a scene. She simply smiled, gathered her things, and introduced herself as she wrapped a towel around her waist. "Amber Whitfield," she said, extending a manicured hand as if we were meeting at a social event rather than during her trespassing on my property. "You must be the man my mother wouldn't stop talking about, the one who ruined our family." "Your mother ruined your family all by herself," I replied, not taking her hand. "And you're trespassing, just like she did." Amber laughed, a sound so like her mother's it sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, I know, but I wanted to see for myself what was so special about this place, this jacuzzi, that my mother became obsessed with it. Obsessed with you and your reaction to her using it." She talked about nothing else for months. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Miss Whitfield, you're trespassing on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." "Of course, officer," she said sweetly. "I was just leaving anyway. I've seen everything I needed to see." As she gathered her things, she turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, my father left my mother because of what happened here. Our whole family fell apart. Mom went to rehab, Dad moved to Florida with his new girlfriend, and I was left to pick up the pieces. All because you couldn't share a little hot water." I felt a surge of anger. "Your mother was repeatedly warned, served with a restraining order, and arrested for her actions. This isn't about sharing. This is about respect for other people's property and boundaries. Something your mother never learned, and apparently neither did you." Amber's smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare that was pure Patricia. "We'll see about that." She walked past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder as she went. "This isn't over. My mother may have given up, but I haven't." After she left, Officer Rodriguez took a statement and advised me to file for another restraining order, this time against Amber. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree with that family," he sighed. I followed his advice, but I had a sinking feeling that legal remedies wouldn't deter Amber any more than they had Patricia, at least not initially. She seemed determined to avenge what she perceived as a wrong done to her family, unable or unwilling to see her mother's role in their downfall. For the next few weeks, I was on high alert. I installed even more security measures, floodlights, an alarm system that would sound if anyone entered my backyard without disarming it, a lock on the jacuzzi cover that required a key to remove. But Amber was craftier than her mother. Instead of direct confrontation, she began a campaign of subtle harassment. Packages disappeared from my porch. My car was keyed in the grocery store parking lot. Anonymous complaints were filed about my mentoring program, suggesting I was too close to some of the kids. Allegations so absurd and offensive that they were immediately dismissed, but not before causing me significant stress. And always, there were the hints that it was her, a blonde hair left deliberately on my doormat, a champagne cork in my mailbox, a monogrammed handkerchief with a W embroidered in the corner found floating in my pool one morning. She was playing a game, seeing how far she could push before I broke. But she hadn't counted on one thing. My 20 years as a cop hadn't just taught me patience. It had taught me strategy. I began keeping meticulous records of every incident, gathering evidence systematically. I set up cameras not just on my property, but also, with my neighbors' permission, on their properties overlooking mine. I hired a private investigator to follow Amber and document her movements. And I waited. The breakthrough came a month later. My PI caught Amber purchasing industrial-grade dye from a specialty shop, the kind used in fountain displays and swimming pools. That same night, my security system detected movement near the jacuzzi. The new cameras, positioned at angles Amber wasn't aware of, captured crystal-clear footage of her pouring the dye into my jacuzzi, then carefully replacing the locked cover so I wouldn't notice until I was already in the water. The dye was permanent, intended to turn my entire jacuzzi, and anyone in it, a fluorescent blue that wouldn't wash off for days. It was a childish prank, but one that could have caused skin reactions or other health issues. I had her. With the footage and the PI's documentation of the purchase, I had irrefutable evidence. But rather than going straight to the police, I decided on a different approach. I left the dye in the jacuzzi. I even made sure the security cameras captured me checking the water temperature but not lifting the cover enough to see the discoloration. Then I called Greg Whitfield. Greg had moved to Florida, as Amber had said, but he was still Amber's father. I explained the situation, sent him the evidence, and made him a proposition. He could either convince his daughter to turn herself in and make restitution, or I would press charges for criminal damage to property, trespassing, and harassment. Given her deliberate, premeditated actions and the evidence I had, she was looking at serious consequences. Greg was silent for a long moment after I laid out the options. Then he sighed deeply. She's become just like her mother. I tried to shield her from the worst of Patricia's behavior, but after the divorce, I should have seen this coming. It's not too late for her, I said, surprising myself with my own compassion. She's young. This can be a wake-up call like Patricia's arrest was, but she needs to face consequences now, before this escalates further. Greg agreed. 2 days later, Amber showed up at my door, her father standing solemnly behind her. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous, almost frightened demeanor. "I'm sorry," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "What I did was wrong. All of it. I was angry about what happened to my family, and I blamed you instead of seeing that my mother's actions were the real cause." I studied her face, looking for signs of the sincerity her mother's letter had seemed to convey. It was there. I saw it, buried under layers of embarrassment and wounded pride. "I appreciate your apology," I said, "but words need to be backed by actions." Greg stepped forward. "Amber has agreed to pay for any damages, including completely replacing the jacuzzi if necessary. She'll also be doing community service of volunteering at your mentoring program, if you're willing to have her. And she's starting therapy to address some of the issues that led to this behavior." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised at the comprehensive nature of the amends being offered. "That seems appropriate. There's one more thing," Amber said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I want to see what the dye would have done. I want to experience the consequences I tried to inflict on you." I was taken aback by the request. "That's not necessary. The dye could be harmful. I researched it thoroughly," she said. "It's non-toxic, though it will stain skin for approximately a week. I need to feel what I was willing to make someone else endure. It's the only way I'll truly understand." I looked at Greg, who nodded. It was her idea, part of taking full responsibility. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We all walked to the backyard, where I removed the cover from the jacuzzi. The water was a shocking electric blue, almost glowing in the afternoon sun. Amber took a deep breath, then removed her jacket to reveal a swimsuit underneath. Without hesitation, she stepped into the jacuzzi and fully submerged herself. When she emerged 30 seconds later, her skin was stained a vivid blue from head to toe. I had to admit, there was something powerful in her willingness to literally wear the consequences of her actions. She climbed out, wrapped herself in a towel, and faced me with blue-tinged skin that would remain that way for at least a week. A public, visible reminder of what she'd attempted to do. "I understand if you still want to press charges," she said. "I deserve it. I considered it. Legally, I had every right to. But I thought about the mentoring program, about the kids I worked with who had made mistakes and were trying to find better paths, about second chances and what they could mean when they were truly earned." "No charges," I said finally. "But I expect you to follow through on everything you've promised. The payment for damages, the community service, the therapy. And I want a signed statement admitting what you did, which I'll hold on to in case there are ever any future incidents." Relief washed over her blue face. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret giving me this chance." Over the next 6 months, Amber kept her word. She paid for a professional to clean and restore my jacuzzi. She showed up reliably for her community service hours, eventually becoming one of the most effective volunteers in the mentoring program due to her ability to connect with the more resistant teens. And according to Greg, who called periodically to check in, she was making real progress in therapy. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or without setbacks. There were days when glimpses of the old entitlement would surface, when she'd bristle at taking direction or being held accountable. But each time, she'd catch herself, take a breath, and redirect. A year after the dye incident, Amber approached me after a mentoring session. "I want to thank you," she said, her confidence now tempered with humility. "Not just for giving me a second chance, but for showing me what real strength looks like. My mother taught me that strength was about getting your way, no matter who it hurt. You taught me that true strength is about standing firm in your principles while still leaving room for compassion." I wasn't sure what to say. This kind of growth, this level of self-awareness, wasn't something I'd expected when I caught her trying to dye my jacuzzi blue. "You did the work," I said finally. "I just provided the opportunity." She shook her head. "You provided more than that. You provided an example of how to be wronged and still remain fair, of how to seek justice without seeking revenge. I needed to see that. I think my mother did too, even if she couldn't admit it at the time." As she walked away, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had led us here. From Patricia's entitled trespassing to Amber's vengeful plotting to this moment of genuine transformation. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been pain and frustration and anger along the way, but there had also been growth and accountability and, eventually, healing. Not all stories involving entitled behavior end this way, of course. Some people never see beyond their own perspective, never take responsibility for the harm they cause. But sometimes, when the right balance of consequences and compassion is struck, real change is possible. That evening, I sat in my jacuzzi under the stars, now completely restored to its original condition. I thought about Patricia, still working at the rehab center in Arizona according to Amber, about Greg, rebuilding his life in Florida, about Amber herself, applying to colleges with plans to study social work, inspired by her time in the mentoring program. One family, torn apart by entitlement and addiction, now scattered but perhaps finally healing, each in their own way. And me, a retired cop who had found a new purpose in retirement, one that extended beyond the peace and quiet I'd initially sought. Sometimes the most meaningful changes come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the people who enter our lives as adversaries leave as allies, or even friends. And sometimes, just sometimes, the consequences we face or impose can lead to transformation rather than merely punishment. As I sank deeper into the warm, clear water of my jacuzzi, in my yard, in my home, I raised a silent toast to boundaries respected, to lessons learned, to second chances earned and given, and to the complex, challenging, ultimately rewarding work of finding justice and healing in an unjust world. Because in the end, that's what we're all searching for, isn't it? Not just to be right, but to be whole. Not just to win, but to reconcile. Not just to punish those who wrong us, but to find a path forward that leaves everyone a little more human, a little more connected, a little more able to see beyond themselves and their immediate desires. It's not easy work. But as I've learned through this unexpected chapter of my retirement, it might be the most important work we can do.